Please welcome to the stage founder and creator of Next.js and Vercel, Guillermo Rauch.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Next.js Conf, our 5th annual. It's so nice to see you all here in San Francisco today, and those joining us from all over the globe. A lot has happened since last year, since we last met you at Next.js Conf. It's been amazing. We've released 5 new Next.js releases. We've merged over 4,000 pull requests. It's a lot of pull requests. And we've welcomed over 570 new community contributors. It's amazing. And you've all been busy too. You've shared your experiences in Next.js meetups, conferences, YouTubes, TikToks, Kicks, I think that's a thing. And yes, even some hilarious memes on the X platform, the Everything app. There are some really good ones. I hand-curated some of these myself. Like, go serverless with Next.js, but it's use server. What's up with that? So, to our incredible community, thank you so very much, and thank you all for coming. You've all done incredible work making Next.js what it is today, and today we're celebrating you. So thank you all for joining us. I do want to single out amazing contributors such as auto-generated avatar from GitHub. You've killed it. Seriously, we've gotten some great PRs from those folks, so thank you very much. But it really wouldn't be a true JavaScript conference if we didn't talk about, you guessed it right, NPM numbers of downloads. So kudos to you all for firing up those CI/CD processes, which is, yeah, you've been busy with those actions. 7 million downloads per week. It's pretty amazing. So according to popular surveys like Stack Overflow, State of JS, National Bureau of Census and Statistics, maybe, Next.js is the world's most popular front-end framework. So many of the very best sites on the internet are using Next.js. And a quarter of those sites have already upgraded to the app router. It's pretty amazing. Including companies like Anthropic, PayPal, Perplexity, XAI, Wayfair, and even the most sophisticated website on the world, my blog, rauchg.com, which has 10 blog posts. But seriously, it's exciting and humbling to see the continued growth and momentum of Next.js. It means that Next.js and its ecosystem is something we can all depend on for the future. And the thing that I personally appreciate, and so does the Next.js team, bar none, the best thing we get from our community is feedback. Feedback is a gift, and the most valuable feedback we've gotten from you all is really all around taming complexity. So you don't like complexity? I don't like complexity. Nobody likes complexity. If you're tuning in, you don't like complexity either. So we hear you, and we wanted to tackle that problem head on. So before going on into the things that we've done, let me briefly rant about complexity, if I may. So there's essential complexity, and there's accidental complexity. Accidental complexity refers to the problems that us engineers create, frankly, and we can fix. But essential complexity is about maybe you're creating something that's truly sophisticated, that's unique, that's dynamic, that does a lot, and it's innovative. And what you want is you want the framework to keep up one-to-one with that complexity, especially as it evolves. And Next.js has always been really about empowering developers to build anything, from the simplest websites to the most sophisticated applications in the world. And a framework for everyone needs to be powerful and flexible enough to cater to that range. But the problem is, in some ways, we front-loaded all that power. And if you're just getting started and you're creating something that's truly simple, you shouldn't get overwhelmed with a bunch of concepts, like difficult implementation details, and so on and so forth. So our opportunity really is about switching to a better approach, switching to a progressive disclosure of complexity. So you really only reach for framework concepts, especially advanced ones, by the time you need it and if you need it. And so today I want to share our vision for Next.js, which applies really to how we think about software development as a whole. And it's based on Kent Beck's quote. Number one, you make it work. Then you make it right. And only then you make it fast. And some might say, you make it blazing fast, if you shall. So let's start with make it work. When I have an idea that I want to share with the world, I want to validate it and get something up and running as quickly as possible. I'm not worried about optimization yet. I just want to make it work. In fact, that's why I started Next.js. I had a website to build for my startup. I wanted to ship my idea to the world, and I didn't want to deal with all of the configuration. So years later, the reason that I got so excited about React Server Components is that when I saw that you could just fetch data and render some markup, for me, it brought me back to my roots. It almost brought a tear to my eye. How could the world be so simple and easy? But then came the complexity. So where it came from is that we wanted the default starting point of Next.js to be as performant as possible. It came from a good place. But it also meant that as a developer, I needed to worry about dynamic APIs like cookies and stable no store. Sounds a little funny. Route config options like export const, default, and all of this config, and force static and dynamic. And even totally uncontroversial fetch overrides and cache no store and the likes. Which, by the way, the thing about this is that it would silently trigger dynamic rendering or static optimizations. And there was a lot to think about as you were writing your app. But to be honest, I didn't want to deal with that complexity. Just thinking about data fetching and philosophizing over data fetching patterns and what is the right way to cache this, and dynamic rendering and SSR. And honestly, I just wanted to fetch data and render the result. And so we've been refining the app router to make data fetching and rendering more predictable and easier to reason about. So let me show you. One of my favorite iOS apps is Flighty. I use it every time I fly. But right now, it's only available on iOS. So let's create a quick MVP for the web. Like Flighty, but blue. And our creative team, of course, came up with the name Next Flights. So let's see how we can create this application. Let's switch to code. Of course, it's a conference. And if you're not live demoing, what are you doing? So I'm going to switch to the Explore page of my application. And of course, the very first thing I do when I start coding an application, dev server is not running. What do? We run the dev server. Of course, it's using TurboPack, and I'm going to load the Explore page. Okay, so where are we today? San Francisco. We're going to watch the flights that are near the San Francisco airport. And right now, I'm not looking at any aircraft. I wonder why that is. And of course, it is because we have an empty array. So let's fetch some flights. Fetching data with React Server Component is, of course, very easy. So we just fetch flights, and we pass the params. I'm going to just save, and I see all of the flights nearby just pop in. Fetching data is really easy. But you know what's not so easy sometimes is reasoning about the caching of that data. And we said, well, dynamic data fetching should just be the default, and it should be easy and simple. So let's demonstrate how that works, right? So I'm going to track a specific flight. This flight is almost going above our head right now. And when you think about dynamic data, what could be more dynamic than the position of flights above our heads, flying at 500 miles per hour? So to demonstrate how every time I refresh or every time I save, I'm going to fetch new data, fresh, I'm going to start changing the color of this flight. Does anyone have a suggestion for a color? Red. I think most people first say red. It's almost like it's staged. It's not. Another one. White. I've never tried white. Nice. I'm going to try cyan. Beautiful. So you see that every time I'm fetching data, every time I'm refreshing this page, every time I'm triggering fast refresh, just new data is coming in. Simple and easy. In fact, let's try this. Oh, awesome. It almost seems AI generated, but it's not. Beautiful. So you know what? My favorite color, as a matter of fact, is black. So we'll just leave it at that. So we've now made it work, and making data fetching work should be this easy and simple. And you shouldn't have to worry so much about the implications of caching and so on and so forth. You're just getting started building something new. And so for me, this is what I wanted to really accomplish, right? Like dynamic without any config, without a PhD, without sitting on a brain couch, just dynamic. And so now that we have something working, it's time to, of course, switching to making it right. And to do that, making it right is a process of me having to iterate and iterate and iterate. And so to iterate is really what makes an application amazing. Creating exceptional apps like Perplexity.com is more than just getting that code to run and the test to pass and be green. It's all about how something looks and feels. And to make something right, you have to try many things out. You have to make adjustments and repeat. So in this phase, iteration velocity is critical. The faster I can iterate, the faster I can go from idea to ship. And any interruption in this flow from idea to ship just takes me out of my flow state and delays shipping, which is not good. So to get to right as quickly as possible, we needed to build a new iteration engine. And that started the journey of TurboPack. Every code change you make needs to be instantly and accurately reflected in your browser so that you can iterate with confidence. We designed TurboPack with speed in mind, but never at the expense of correctness. So if something is fast 9 out of 10 times and works 9 out of 10 times, but then you occasionally hit a roadblock and it's unpredictable, it's unacceptable. So it's not just about speed, right? So it's about getting reliable updates. It's about getting rid of obscure errors. It's about not getting that bundle error where you have to debug line 1,000,003 in position 314. And so that can cost you hours of debugging. It can make you lose faith in the tool. And so we wanted to show you that make it right can be both reliable and friendly. So we're going to go back to my flight tracker app to now make it right after having made it work. So I mentioned that we can track a specific flight, and there is this flight details page over here. So the flight details page, the previous developer, I guess, checked out. There's no flight detail page over here. So we have an empty page. So flight details page, the URL is getting the ID of the flight. That's my param. And then what I want to do is I want to render some flight activity, right? So I'm going to pass that param, that ID, along. I'm going to save. And an error popped in. Let's take a look at why an error popped in. The UI is beautiful, by the way. So this error is telling me that in the route flights with the AD param, this component accesses data without a suspense boundary above it to provide a fallback UI. So in life, there's bad errors and there's good errors that push you to be better. This is one such example. In the past, Next.js had a ton of implicit behavior. It kind of tried to guess and optimize for you. In this case, it's saying, yo, Rauch G, you should think about this. You should add a suspense boundary. You should add some fallback UI. So I'm going to add a skeleton over here. And you should wrap your dynamic data fetching with it. And so we can see that I rendered a beautiful skeleton in loading state, and then the data came in. Let's take a look at that skeleton again. It's especially important for that snappy initial load. Beautiful. And lo and behold, another error. But let's take a look. Oh, this is the final boss of React errors. The moment we've been all waiting for. I'm sure you thought this morning when I watched this presentation, I'm going to get another hydration error. So we've made a lot of improvements to errors in the dev server of Next.js. And in particular, hydration errors stood out as something where the dev server was just not giving you enough feedback and guidance. So we went in, we provided a lot of information, we provided an accurate diff of what went on that yielded that hydration error. And I actually recruited one of my teammates to fix it for me. So I just renamed to fix, and we're so back. Goodbye, hydration error. So it is truly important that the framework works together with you, not against you, in figuring these things out. Last but not least, I'm going to add the plain details. Let's see what aircraft I got this time. Hopefully it's an aircraft I like. Not that I'm too super opinionated about aircraft, but it's a beautiful Airbus A320. All right, so we've started to make this right. And this is thanks to all of the hundreds of little improvements that we've made to the dev server and the developer experience in response to your excellent feedback. And after months and months and months of rigorous work on getting the fundamentals right, I'm pleased to announce that TurboPack for development is now stable and ready for wider use. So in recent months, we've focused on three things. One, parity with our previous compiler. We last gave you an update about how many tests we were passing. So I'm very, very happy to give you an update that we're passing all of the tests of our previous compiler, 6,599. We could have even added one more test to make it round, but we decided not to. Redundant tests are not good. So number two, expanded ecosystem compatibility. With much better support for Webpack loaders, React compiler, CSS solutions like Tailwind, style components, Emotion, Node Sass, and more. And three, optimized cold compilation. This is a good one. So we've made a further 30% improvement in average memory utilization, and 40% faster initial compilation for large pages. Overall, compared to our previous compiler, TurboPack is now up to 50% faster for initial compilation and up to 90% faster for code updates with fast refresh. But, yeah, I mean, this is amazing. Thank you. Thank you to the TurboPack team. But we can do even better. We can go founder mode on this thing. We can push harder. And so let's take a look at what's coming soon for TurboPack, because we're not done. So the little, tiny flight tracker app is compiling routes really fast, which isn't surprising given its size. In fact, when I was iterating, most of the time was dominated by fetching the flight API and not compiling. So now I'd like to share some tests on something more ambitious, a larger, more mature production app, the Next.js.org website. So if you go to the site, it looks visually simple, but it's seen years of iteration from dozens of engineers. It has over 6,000 imports. It uses Tailwind and CSS modules. It has things like a conference takeover, which you've seen, and WebGL and SVG and 3JS and a GDPR cookie banner and the works. And to set expectations, this is the experience that a Next.js dev that works on Next.js.org gets with the previous compiler. So strap in. It's going to be quite the journey. It's going to take a while to start up. And this is the part where we all agonize together. We're waiting for the first route to come in. We're waiting for those node modules to be retrieved from the ether. Come to me, node modules. Let me bundle you to make you fast at last. No, seriously, this is real life. And so, to be fair, I'm going to stop the server. I'm going to run it again to reflect what happens when the server is already warm, meaning there is some cache of previous work. So our previous compiler did support that. So when it starts up again, it is a little faster. It's still not like, I don't like go nuts over this, but it's faster. And as we say in Argentina, that's no bueno. Just kidding. Nobody says that in Argentina. So let's look at turbo cold instead. Boots up much faster and compiles much faster as well. So 1.2 seconds and 4.5 seconds. And this was, yeah. Yeah, this is good because this is like raw performance of a cold, predictable compiler. But what if we added caching? Like, let's take a look at our upcoming experimental caching improvements. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. When we run TurboPack plus cache against our large code base, it compiled in 900 milliseconds and then 293 milliseconds. So let's run it again. We're going to run the turbo command again. It's really fast. It's pretty freaking fast. In fact, run it again. In fact, I don't even need to do work anymore. I can just run it all day and just marvel at how fast it is. And so why is it so fast? Instead of redoing the work, TurboPack resumed from a persistent cache rather than recompiling every single module again. And so to sum up, I think the data is pretty awesome in that we started with a cold previous compiler at 22 seconds, and then TurboPack can bring us down to 290 milliseconds soon with our new technology. The difference is pretty dramatic to what it can do to dev experience. And by the way, fast refresh, so when you make little edits to your app, that's still measured in milliseconds. And for me, iteration velocity is not really just about local development. It's also about building and sharing with the team, with customers, with the world. So we've been busy, and just like we did for TurboPack for development, we wanted to give you an update on builds. We're sharing our progress again on areweturboyet.com. We're now passing 96% of the tests from our previous compiler baseline. This is 6,822 tests that we've accumulated over a very, very long time, running this with so many customers around the world and thousands of production applications. And the reason we're so excited about this is that, and also the reason that we're making fast progress is we're sharing the infrastructure between local development and production builds. It's just one compiler infra. And that has allowed us to actually share optimizations. So for example, when we turned on incremental caching for production builds, some of our large apps built 5 times faster. Very, very exciting stuff. And ultimately for me, this is why we created TurboPack. We envisioned a compiler that didn't just do the same work over and over and over again. One important detail is the time the compiler takes is proportional to the size of the change rather than to the size of the code base. And so you can get really, really, really ambitious with how large a single Next.js application can get, and also how big the team that can work on that single application can get. You don't need to arbitrarily split your application just because of the compiler anymore. And so what we're doing here is almost like what fast refresh did for development, resuming from previous progress to make that development experience completely instantaneous. So we've made it work, we've started to make it right, and now we're ready to make it fast. I'd like to invite Delba to the stage to tell us more.
All right, thank you, Jay. So it's time we make it fast. Going back to our application, the first thing that I notice if I refresh the page is that first, the skeleton is now wrong, and we'll fix it in a second. But it's actually kind of slow, in my opinion. Do we really need to refetch and re-render the data for every single visitor of our application? What if we do want to add some caching to this page to make it faster? Now, earlier, when G wanted dynamic content, he just fetched and rendered data. No new APIs. So that means that now we do need some way to mark this as cacheable. We could reach out to one of the existing Next.js APIs, but we are iterating over caching, and we want a better disclosure of, Disclosure of complexity. Thank you, guys. So, what if, and hear me out, please don't get mad, what if we could just use cache? Right, let's see. I'm going to hard refresh the page. That's going to be a cache miss. I'm going to refresh it again. Cache miss? Oh, I didn't save the file. Hold on. Okay, let's do that again. Hard refresh, miss. Hard refresh, hit, hit, hit. So to clarify, by default, the use cache uses a in-process memory cache. What that means is that it starts in memory, but then later on, you can configure to your own architecture so that in the future, if you want to, you can host the cache anywhere. And this is a Next.js directive, but we created it so that it's just as composable as the use client and use server directives. Right. This also means that with this mode, caching is completely opt-in and explicit now. Now, this is a good start for our application, but looking at our UI, we have a small issue, right? The plain details, they don't change that often, so it can benefit from being cached. But what about recent activity? If you think about it, planes take off, they land, they get delayed. So this information here is actually going to change all the time. Now, since we added use cache to the top of the page, this actually means that everything else below it is going to get cached. And if you're familiar with use client, then you probably will already guess that in order to regain some dynamic behavior in this page, what we have to do is move use cache down the component tree. So let's start by moving suspense down to wrap flight activity. This is going to be our dynamic component. And I'm going to get the same error again, saying that we now have something dynamic in our page. That's OK. So I'm going to cut use cache, go into plain details, add it here, save, refresh, and now we have a static or cached component and a dynamic component in the same page. Now we can stop here, and that's OK. That's as far as you can go. But if you want to get a little bit more fancy, what you can do is cut use cache, go into the get plain details function, and then add it within the function body itself. Going to refresh again. And there you go. Now, what does this mean? If you are using useCache within a data fetching function, wherever you use that function within your application, what will happen is the cache entry, as long as the input value here is the same, is going to get reused. So it's actually very cheap to use cache throughout your application. Now, if you use the app router, you already know that we have an API for this, right? We have unstable cache. And there is a difference between them. So you can think of useCache as a successor to unstable cache. While unstable cache was really good at caching JSON data, useCache can cache anything that React renders. So anything that's serializable. That means you can use it with fetch, your database clients, ORMs, and now even within the component itself. Now, one thing we haven't covered yet is revalidation, right? Because you do want to configure your caching. We also have now 2 new APIs to help you with revalidation. And I have a snippet for that, because it's quite verbose. OK, I'm going to have to type this out. So we have unstable cache tag as cache tag, and we have label cache life as cache life from next cache. Okay, there you go. So cache tag can be used for on-demand revalidation, whereas cache life can be used for time-based revalidation. So with cache tag, you can pass in some form of tag. So let's say, sorry, this isn't an American keyboard, and I'm from Europe. OK, plain details. And also, someone switched off Copilot, which is not great. OK. There you go. Right, so with cache tag, you just pass in the tag, and then later on, within a server action or a route handler, you can then call your tag to revalidate. So it could be based on an event, like a form submission or a webhook. Now, with cache life, you might be tempted to pass in a number, right? But we actually wanted to make this a lot more simpler by giving you built-in cache profiles. These cache profiles describe caching in terms of plain English. So we have seconds, minutes, hours, days, and so on. The idea is that it's actually easier for us to think about caching in terms of order of magnitude instead of precise seconds. For example, if we go back to the hours profile, this is telling us that we want it to revalidate after every hour. And on the server, we want the cache to expire after 1 day. Now, what's interesting here is that the stale time is used for the client-side router cache. So on the client-side router cache, what we're saying is that we want it to use the same cache entry for 5 minutes until it goes to the server again to check for a new cache. So you can see why it's just not a plain number, because the cache profiles, they actually integrate across the framework caching layers. So hopefully you won't have to think so much about the different caching layers and network boundaries, etc. Cool. So profiles are great, but some of you actually might want more control, right? And that's okay too, because you can customize these existing profiles, you can create your own, and you can even pass in a built-in, like your own configuration to the function itself. So our goal with this API is to reduce the decision fatigue that comes with revalidation. So if we think about the way that we want you to start off, we want you to start off simple, right? And then if you need more customization and you need a more specific use case, you can reach out for that specific use case with the same API. Now, if we Consider Next.js as it is today. And if we go back to our previous APIs, there's quite a few things that with these semantics you will no longer need. We talked about unstable cache, but there's also route config options like dynamic fetch cache and revalidate. There's fetch extensions, the famous fetch extensions, like next revalidate and next tags. And obviously, there's also the global stale times config option, and so much more. So overall, these APIs hopefully will make sure that you don't have to carry a lot of information in your brain. And personally, I am also looking forward to simplifying the Next.js docs so that it's easier for people to learn Next.js. So to summarize what we discussed, we fetch and render data dynamically with async server components. For the dynamic paths, we use suspense to leverage streaming. If we want to pre-render something, we use cache. And then to revalidate and to configure that cache, we use cache live and cache tag. That's it. And you also might be wondering, okay, Delba, but what about partial pre-rendering? Didn't you announce that last year? Well, the good news is that use cache is actually the precursor to partial pre-rendering. When we were working on partial pre-rendering, one challenge that we faced was how to tell the framework which parts of your application to be dynamic versus static. So these new APIs are actually intended to make rendering simpler and explicit, not just for the framework, but for you as the user as well. So when you use cache effectively, when the Next.js is pre-rendering the application, it will take the use cache paths and make it a part of the static shell and make it persistent. So Wyatt, who is one of the engineers, or the main engineer that worked on partial pre-rendering, he will be delivering a talk today where he will share the research we had the last year. So I do recommend watching his talk, so don't miss out on that, okay? So now, last question, which I know you all have in mind, okay? Can you start using it? Should you start using it? I would say no. Not yet. These APIs are still in active development, and we need to polish them before we can make them available. But I know that some of you are truly adventurous, and if you want to try it out, you can turn on an experimental flag in Next.js Canary. And we are also preparing the docs. So if you go to the Canary version of the docs, you will be able to learn more about what we discussed today. Okay, so we've made it work. We've made it right. We're making it fast. And finally, when you're building your application, it's time for you to ship it, right? So I remember that Lee recently posted a video on self-hosting Next.js on a $5 VPS. And I would like to invite him to the stage to talk to us more about deploying with Next.js. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delba. It was actually a $4 VPS, so thank you, DigitalOcean. Shout out to them. All right, let's talk about deploying. Next.js isn't possible without you all, without our community, and we're constantly iterating and evolving based on your feedback. One of the things that you told us was you wanted to see improvements for self-hosting. So today, I'd like to share some of our progress here. First, we're going to talk a little bit about self-hosting education. Then we're going to talk about some of the improvements that we've made to the core of Next.js itself. And finally, we're going to talk about our commitment to open source. But first, let's start with those self-hosting education improvements. So we've had docs and examples for a while on how to self-host, but they lacked, honestly, a little bit of depth on some of the features like caching and image optimization and how to use Next when you deploy to multi-container setups. Like, there's a lot of things you had to configure. So we made this better. And with Next.js 15, we made it easier to configure the default cache handler. So you can take the in-memory caching and define this custom cache handler that you can bring your own Redis or use any adapter that you want. Now, this works with the pages or app routers, and it supports all of the Next.js caching features like ISR and even use cache, which we just showed. So defaults to in-memory, but you can change it and persist it to storage if you would prefer. So we've also improved our self-hosting documentation And I just recently posted a new video walking through how to do self-hosting, deploying it to your VPS, how to configure all of the features, and also talk through some of the trade-offs and configurations that you might want to make. So please check this out. Let me know your feedback and what you want to see us continue with self-hosting education. But we've also made other improvements to the core of Next.js, to the framework itself, to make it easier to self-host. Previously, Next.js used a WebAssembly-based image optimization library. And while this was faster to install, it unfortunately used a little bit more memory when you deployed on a server when you're self-hosting. So we didn't really like that trade-off. The nice thing about Sharp is that it's both fast to install and it's very memory efficient. So with Next.js 15, we automatically install Sharp for you for our self-hosted users. You can have the best of both worlds. Another improvement is that we've updated the default cache control headers. So in Next.js 15 now, it's a lot easier to override these defaults. Honestly, before it was kind of hard to do this. It wasn't really an easy way of changing the defaults or the stale while we validate times. So now we've updated the default value here to be a year, and the times are more cohesive, they're correct, and customizable. And last but not least, I know y'all are very excited about this one, we will also be supporting the Node.js runtime for middleware, which is a common request when self-hosting. So, awesome. The last bit here is that in your configuration, you can also have some new options here to be able to fully customize your caching for your own setup, your own CDN structure. So you can basically configure this however you want. Our goal with Next.js is really to level up the whole ecosystem and share our research back with you all. So I want to talk a little bit about open source and our commitment here. We build features in Next.js in parallel with dogfooding them on Vercel's infrastructure. This helps enable this high cohesion between the framework and the infrastructure, but when we're ready to actually get this out into the world, we want to have a loose coupling between those two. So it shouldn't feel like those two things are together, and we want to make it easy then when you deploy wherever to have these features in a stable way, decoupled from whatever infrastructure we've tested on. So I want to share a little bit more about what we've learned here to help you all create amazing products. And honestly, not all of them are going to use or should use Vercel, and that's okay. We want you to have options. So today we're announcing a new Next.js GitHub community organization. This is going to be the home for templates and deployment examples and community adapters and a bunch of resources for you all. I'm really thankful to all of these partners that we've been working with to create these templates, and also excited to work with those who are not yet listed here. So very, very excited for this. Awesome. Next.js is made better thanks to all of the amazing libraries that we depend on, like PostCSS, Lightning CSS, Sharp, Zod, and more, and Rust libraries like Nappy, Serday, Tokyo, so many things here. And there's also community packages for SEO and internationalization, type safety, docs, so many things here. So to say thank you, we're giving back all of the Next.js Conf ticket sales back to our community members. Let's give it up for these folks. All right. Well, our ambition with Next.js is to be a powerful but approachable framework for the next million or billion applications on the web. We'll see how it goes. It should be easy to start, flexible enough to adapt to your needs, and also powerful enough to support any level of ambition of your app or your business requirements. So in summary today, we've talked a little bit about reducing the upfront configuration in your application. We've made it easier to get started and make it work, get started quickly. With stable TurboPack for development and even more upcoming speed improvements, I'm very excited about that, you can now iterate with confidence and make it right. And finally, with simpler, more composable APIs, we're making caching opt-in and explicit. You can now more easily make it fast. So that wraps up the keynote. Thank you so much.